In many ways, yes.
I mean, to go into an abbey and to become, to go into the
yes,
church.
Every 5 years or so, Matt, Liszt would change his character. Now, I don't know if this was out of good showbiz or truly internal needs. I think a little bit showbiz. A consummate showman, unrivaled in many ways. He would come out for concerts wearing sometimes outlandish attire. In Russia, he came out with big fur-lined and fur on the gloves, and the Tsar could not believe his long hair, because in the 1842 Russia, when he first made his first appearances there, that was taboo to have long hair. Well, Liszt would confront even the Tsar, and the Tsar had said, well, what are your politics, Monsieur Liszt? And Liszt said, Sire, I have no politics unless I have behind me 200,000 bayonets. He said, Monsieur Liszt, your hair is very long. We don't wear hair that long in Russia. Sire, I grew my hair long in Paris, and if it's ever to be cut short, it will be cut short in Paris. Now, he had great audacity. Remember that Russia was quite repressive. It still had millions upon millions of serfs, not freed until, I think, 1861. Other concerts, he'd come on stage with medallions and even his sword, which was given to him by the Hungarian government. Now, he made Hungary famous for during the 19th century, for it was considered a semi-barbaric country, and there was the hypocrite in him. He would go back and he would get all of these all this adulation, and the ruby sword, and nobility would be attached to his name. However, he couldn't speak the Hungarian language, but he became a truly professional Hungarian.
Mm-hmm. Which is probably possible to do without speaking Hungarian.
Now, he used everything to his advantage. Liszt understood press agentry very well, and if one wanted to study his methods, we would be most impressed if you were trying to build a career. Now, of course, today it's a little different, and he wasn't the Beatle or the rock star that Ken Russell tried to make him out to be in Listomania, which was a ridiculous movie. But I understood what he was trying to do in the film, Mr. Russell. In a Paris concert, for instance, he played one of his specialties. This was early in his career. There were so many phases. This is around 1830, and he's playing at the Paris Conservatory, and he's doing the Weber Concertstück, which was a specialty of his. And the last movement is a tremendous prestissimo of great finger action and movement. And Liszt began it faster than he could even he could possibly finish it. Well, what did he do to save the day? Well, he fainted in the middle.
I read that, as a
matter
of fact. Yeah, perfect. He didn't have an agent. This all came out of his own mind.
No, it was before before you hired someone to make you famous. He did it on his own. And his model was Paganini, and he had remember that the Industrial Revolution had created a great middle-class audience that was craving entertainment. Art had now been taken away from the aristocracy, the Haydn's and Mozart's being patronized. The artist was on his own, and he was now involved with a big public. And this first virtuoso that truly was in this manner was Dussek, who decided that he had a marvelous profile, and he was going to play with his right side to the audience. Before you played, the piano was not placed the way we now know it.
No, in fact, I was reading up a bit on this, and I understand that before Liszt, in fact, or before Dussek perhaps, that you either faced the audience or had your back to them.
That's right.
And
now, Dussek said, no way, and he was called Le Beau Dussek. Well, Liszt was, from reports, wonderfully handsome, slender, and he certainly used all of the allure of his appearance, which in youth was what we just discussed, and as he aged, this long hair became white, and the characteristic photos that we instantly know as Liszt, he looked like an Apache chief. In his
many ways.
Abbey's gown.
Well, of course. I mean, that was the time of the American cowboy in India, and I imagine that they caught on to that.
Well, Barnum, Barnum understood by 1870, 1860, actually, America produced not anything of the romanticism of a Liszt, but they produced their own brand, or we did, and that was the first, and some would say ugly American, P.T. Barnum. He brought Jenny Lind over, the Swedish Nightingale. And besides that, of course, he managed the circus performers, Tom Thumb and all the other people that we actually still know of. When I say Tom Thumb, it's come down to us. Well, Jenny Lind came here. He wanted to get Gottschalk, our own American star pianist, but Gottschalk didn't need an impresario. Well, Liszt became more and more famous. Barnum offered him $1 million to come here. Liszt didn't want to come to America, and he, by this time, was too grand a man to even play in public for a fee. He didn't teach for a fee.
How did he live? That's one of the things I wanted to get into. Did he become fantastically wealthy as a result of his talent and press agentry?
During the 12 years of his European concert work, taking him from Spain, Constantinople, Kiev, Odessa, all over. A tremendous span of territory was covered. He made great amounts of money. Now, Liszt did not necessarily save money, but he didn't make it out of compositions. He didn't really, he lived with rich women, no doubt about it. But they sacrificed a great deal of their fortunes, especially the Princess Wittgenstein, who lived with him during the very serious years of Weimar, where he became the conductor at court and championed so many modern composers. So as we're beginning to see, this man Liszt will emerge as one of the most interesting characters in music. But now let's get to the music. And yesterday we heard 4 of the Transcendental Etudes, concluding with Mazeppa. Let's go backward, because we now have the Ashkenazy recording in our library, and hear the 5th one, Paysage, landscape, scenery. Do you have that ready? 4th one. That's right. Thank you.
Shown on the label is number...
Well, let's hear it and we'll see what happens.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
That was the great Vladimir Ashkenazy in Liszt's third Transcendental Etude, an etude in touch, in sound, and it's titled Paysage Landscape. Mazeppa, the fourth etude in the series of Transcendental Etudes, 12 in number, will be played by Clark David Wilde, who was first prize in the Budapest International Piano Festival. Let's hear this taxing work where the arms can just fall off. Clark David Wilde in Liszt's sensational Mazeppa, the fourth of the Transcendental Studies. There's a program to this. Mazeppa was a Polish nobleman, Ivan Mazeppa, 1644-1709, and he was made famous in poems by Byron and Victor Hugo and also by Pushkin. He was a page in the court of King John Casimir of Poland when he entangled with the wife of a nobleman. For this he was punished by being tied naked to a wild horse, which was then set loose and ran to the Ukraine, where it fell exhausted. Mazeppa was rescued by the Cossacks and became their leader. Victor Hugo treated the subject symbolically, referring to the artist tied to the wild horse of genius, and Liszt showed his identification with Victor Hugo's conception by quoting at the end of the piece Victor Hugo's words, "He falls at last and arises king." And later on in his career, Liszt would use the thematic material for his tone poem, Mazeppa.
We had been talking yesterday about the fact that he studied piano with some notables of the time, Czerny in particular.
Czerny especially, yes.
Yeah. I noticed in looking through some of the material I dug up that he studied composition with Salieri, and yet I can't think of anyone, who he's more unlike.
Yes, for a
Salieri.
time he did. When he went to Paris, it was his ambition, he was now, I think, 14, to enter the Paris Conservatory. He was already well known as a prodigious pianist, and Cherubini was the venerable dictator-director of the conservatory, the Italian composer, and he had made it a rule that although he was Italian and could be the director, he decided that no foreign-born, you had to be French to be in the conservatory. So this was a great disappointment to Liszt, and he studied with a few minor teachers in composition, wrote an opera at that age, 14, Don Sancho, and after that we can really say that Liszt had no teachers. As a matter of fact, one can say outside of Czerny, who was still of the old school of pianism. You must remember that Liszt and Chopin created the instrument as we know it. He did not have teachers. I mean, really no one could teach Liszt. At the age of 21, he shut himself up for 2 years after hearing Paganini play. Disappeared from the public. Well, he was a turbulent young man and full of the spirit of the times, the Revolution of 1830. Affected him, all of the new isms of the day affected him, and he was quite confused, and of course he was always vastly religious. And he disappeared from there was always something in him that he couldn't stand about performing in public. This dualism which racked his spirit from beginning to end. He hated to be the performing dog. Remember, he was petted from the beginning as this beautiful child prodigy.
Well, Beethoven kissed him even, I understand.
The
after
legend
a
of
performance.
Beethoven kissing him in Vienna, yeah.
Right.
Beethoven, though, was stone deaf, so we don't exactly...
Well, you better tell the rest of the story. He gave a concert. Liszt gave a concert.
He was quite deaf by this time, and legend has it that after the concert he walked on stage and picked up the young Liszt in his bear hug and kissed him on the cheek. Forever after, of course, Liszt used the legend to his advantage in every way, and
Of course, I mean that's a PR man's
remember,
dream,
yes,
yeah.
of course, and remember he did much for Beethoven when he transcribed all the 9 symphonies when there was no way for the small towns in Europe to hear these works.
Oh, that's right. He did the Beethoven 5th transcription.
Yes,
Am I
yes.
correct? That Glenn Gould has recorded?
Glenn Gould himself, mad, wonderful man, has recorded this on Columbia, the Liszt transcription of the 5th Symphony.
One of the things I ran across in reading through these various Liszt things, which I didn't read very carefully, but talking about his opera Don Sancho, it supposedly was destroyed in a fire, and then a manuscript reappeared in 1903. Has that turned out to be authentic?
Yes. Yes, and it's
have...
just not a very, good work, or it would have been performed even as a curiosity. he was trying to get into the French opera world, which there was a great deal of money in it, and Meyerbeer, Rossini, all of the operatic composers in the 1830s were in Paris, and the Paris public was opera mad.
Well, they were piano mad also. I mean, you had
but,
Chopin and Czerny and Liszt.
Everybody
at that time.
was there, yes.
Everyone. Yeah.
Everyone.
Let me ask you one question. If he had not been as flamboyant, if he had not been his own
let's say
PR
that he's
man,
more than flamboyant. He's tortured. This part of him that shuts himself up for 2 years to practice. Well, the octaves in Mazeppa, the chords, the 2 hours a day he would practice octaves alone. He in a letter wrote Locke, Plato, Weber, Hummel, the Bible, and so and so and so and so, are all around me. Besides this, I practice thirds, octaves, scales, 10 hours a day, providing I don't go mad. You will find an artist in me, an artist that you desire.
Well, my question was, if he had not had the benefit of the PR, let's say, and the knowledge of how to use the press and public opinion, would he have been as recognized as he was? I mean, was his talent so great that
the
no
media
matter
creates everything, even in the 19th century. The man's scandalous love affairs throughout Europe. The newspapers of the day made him a chief gossip item. Remember, when Liszt played the piano, people were going to hear. They were going to hear him at all costs. Sometimes the tickets were astronomical. They couldn't go turn on their television, turn on WNCN for music, go to the movies. There was nothing.
Except manuscripts.
There was nothing except the public performer who was now emerging as hero. Liszt was more than a pianist. He was a symbol of middle-class prosperity, even. Hans Christian Andersen, and I must bring that in, it's a wonderful description of Liszt playing in Hamburg. Andersen talking about this Orpheus of the modern world playing for these mercantile Hamburg stuffed shirts, as he called them. Anyway, the next of the Transcendental Etudes will never be hackneyed because of its difficulty. It's a work in many double notes, and it is one of his most delightful pieces, Fufale, Will of the Wisp. a great virtuoso in Vladimir Ashkenazy. Let's have another Fufale with an equally powerful virtuoso, and at times more so, Jorge Bolet. Jorge Bolet in a very fine performance of Will-o'-the-Wisp. Yet both performances don't quite hit it. We have another one, Lazar Berman. Now that was the light pianism necessary for a great performance of Fufale, a work far more difficult than it sounds. Well, I have to read something. Carl Maria von Weber, born in Schleswig. Matt, let's go on to the sixth etude, unless you have a question.
No, I have so many questions that if I started, I don't think we'd have any time today for any music.
Well, the sixth etude is vision, and Liszt is doubtless seeing a vision, and it's a rich canvas. And again, I don't believe that the thematic material is up to some of the others in the set, but it's very effectively composed for the piano with some wonderful characteristic orchestral sonorities, which Liszt tried to capture orchestral effects on the piano. This is where he was quite different pianistically than Liszt, than Chopin, who would never try to go beyond the resources of the instrument. That's why Liszt calls these transcendental etudes. He's really going beyond what the piano can do sonorously. So the thematic material is cheap, but what an effect. Lazar Berman at his mightiest. We'll continue with Liszt and his Transcendental Etudes on the next program. Thank you for listening.